Think Tank Watch.
You mentioned changes to advertising for kids and junk food. But what do you think is the answer? Is there something that's much more radical that has to be done about obesity and public health?
Here's Laura Cluelessberg speaking to Dr. Zan van ter Looken on the issue of the nation's health and food. We'll get to think tanks in a minute, but first let's hear about unhealthy food and the companies that produce it.
They're talking about weight loss jabs. What would be your advice?
Our food environment is dominated by a small number of companies that sell us huge quantities of unhealthy food. And we are the worst country for this in Europe. So when we talk about personal responsibility, we talk about weight gain, and we have any element of blame in it, that totally misunderstands the problem. We have not all got greedier and lazier over the last 30 years. Instead, there has been a total failure to regulate the food companies who shape our food environment.
But how would you actually go about doing that? I mean, is it really for government to tell people what they can eat or tell what companies can put in?
Well, I really hope so, to ensure that they don't allow all manner of things into the food we eat. If there aren't regulations, they could be mixing any shit into the stuff we consume. Anyway.
So nanny state accusations are the main barrier to government action. So when my wife is working on a report with Henry Dimbleby at the moment, so this is all we ever talk about around the dinner table, she's interviewed prime ministers, all his predecessors for the last 30 years, I think almost all of them, prominent politicians who've worked on obesity policy. And the main message is that ignore the nanny statist accusations because the public are desperate for help. And we know this, the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission have had conversations with citizens up and down the country, and everyone is on the Health Secretary's side. People desperately want help, they want their children to be looked after, and they want more choice. So it's not about saying what to eat, it's about having the freedom to make healthy choices and the opportunity to do it.
Think tanks like the IEA and Taxpayers Alliance are always barking on about the nanny state. Here rather kindly of the BBC is an article from a few years back featuring dear Chakravarty of the Taxpayers Alliance banging on about a sugar tax. Let's see if she mentions the nanny state.
In just over a week's time, the Chancellor in his budget statement will tell us exactly how much tax he will be slapping onto some sugary drinks. A great win for the nanny state champions. For the rest of us, not so much. For a start, this tax will hit the poorest families hardest. These so-called consumption taxes, like this one, and ones on, say, tobacco or alcohol, hit poorer families harder because they pay a greater portion of their income in these taxes. Hardly a recipe to help hard-pressed families. What makes the plans even worse is that evidence suggests that the tax might not even work. So, while the consumption of drinks like these might go down, these drinks are exempt from the scheme, even though they contain just as much sugar. So what's the point, really? People will just get their sugar fix from somewhere else. There's plenty of evidence from abroad that it doesn't work. They introduced a tax on sugary drinks in Mexico not that long ago. And yes, the consumption of these drinks did go down, and the number of calories also went down by a whopping 5 a day. People simply got their calories another way. You can potentially tax people away from cigarettes because the alternatives to them, like e-cigarettes or nicotine patches, are actually healthier than tobacco. But that's not necessarily the case with the alternatives to sugary drinks. A study in America found that a similar tax resulted in a rise in the sales of beer. Hardly the alternative we're after. And even if it did work, is it really necessary? There's plenty of evidence to suggest that obesity has actually peaked, and it is public information campaigns that actually are more effective in bringing about real change in people's lifestyles. This is just an ill-considered way for the Treasury to raise some money, but hurting the poorest families in the process. So while our politicians, in their smugness, can pick up one of these sugary drinks on their way to more nannying, tax-free, anyone buying these sugary drinks will be penalised. Doesn't quite make sense, does it?
We'll look further into Chakravarty's claims in a future video. Click here for Mark Littlewood from the IEA getting caught red-handed.